The air in the palate tasted like money and fear. It was a flavor I knew well, the signature blend of Elysian foods. From my seat on the 50th floor, the city of San Francisco sprawled below, a toy set of fog and ambition. The bay was a sheet of hammered silver under the morning sun. Inside, the only view that mattered was the one reflected in the polished surface of the long walnut table, 8 executives, motionless in their expensive suits, and me. My official title was Head of Innovation and Applied Science. My unofficial title, the one whispered in the labs and test kitchens, was the Flavor Architect. For 12 years, I had built worlds on the tip of a tongue. I could decode a memory from a single scent, reverse engineer nostalgia, and compose symphonies of taste from molecules and light. My name is Ileonora Vance, but everyone calls me Nora. And at 38 years old, I believed my work was my soul. At the head of the table stood Julian Croft. He was handsome in the way a freshly printed banknote is handsome, crisp, official, and utterly without warmth. He was our CEO, a man assembled from TED Talks, venture capital, and the bones of smaller, more passionate companies he'd acquired. He had this way of smiling that didn't involve his eyes, a practiced upward curve of the lips that signaled satisfaction with his own performance. He was performing now. "Team," he began, his voice smooth and deep, the kind of voice that could sell sand in a desert. "Today, we are not just launching a product, we are launching a revolution." The 8 executives, my colleagues, remained perfectly still. They were a Greek chorus of silent approval. I called them the suits. They saw food not as nourishment or joy, but as market share percentages and quarterly growth projections. They were Julian's people. I used to think I was too. Julian clicked a remote. The massive screen behind him came to life. The logo was sleek, minimalist, glowing with an ethereal light. Aura Edibles. The name alone made my stomach clench. Aura Edibles represents the next frontier in functional foods, Julian continued, his voice swelling with manufactured passion. Imagine a line of products that don't just feed you, but enhance you. Boost cognitive function, promote cellular regeneration, improve mood. All of it sourced from a single, proprietary, and endlessly renewable core compound. He paused for dramatic effect. The suits leaned forward in unison, a synchronized display of corporate hunger. My own breath caught in my throat. I knew what was coming. I had lived and breathed it for 6 years, my secret world, my life's work. The next slide appeared. It was a complex molecular diagram, a beautiful, intricate lattice of blues and greens. It was the heart of Project Lumina. My project, a unique bioactive compound derived from bioluminescent algae, a substance that could amplify the natural flavors and nutritional value of any food it touched, all while being completely self-sustaining. It was magic distilled into science. My magic. "This," Julian said, gesturing to the screen with a flourish, "is the engine of our future. A future that will make Elysian Foods not just a leader, but the undisputed king of the entire wellness industry." A low murmur of appreciation went through the suits. They were looking at profits, at stock options, at bonuses. I was looking at a ghost, my ghost, stolen from its home and put on display. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This was wrong. This was too soon. We hadn't finalized the patent filings under my name. The protocols weren't complete. My name. The thought was a small, desperate bell ringing in the back of my mind. I had to speak. My voice, when it came, felt foreign in the sterile room. "Julian," the single word cut through his monologue. The performance stopped. 14 eyes turned to me. Julian's smile tightened, a barely perceptible shift that I, after years of study, could read as acute annoyance. "Nora," he said, his tone one of indulgent patience, as if speaking to a precocious but disruptive child. "You have a thought?" "I do," I said, keeping my voice level, betraying none of the panic churning inside me. "The Lumina compound is brilliant. It's revolutionary. But launching it now under this branding, without the proper IP protections in place, it's a catastrophic risk, legally and ethically." The word ethically hung in the air like a bad smell. In this room, it was a foreign concept. Julian let the silence stretch, a tactic he used to make people uncomfortable, to make them feel small. He was a master of weaponizing silence. He then let out a soft chuckle. It was a sound more insulting than any shout. "Nora, Nora, Nora," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I appreciate your diligence, I truly do. That's what makes you such a wonderful scientist. But perhaps you should leave the business strategy to the business strategists." He gestured vaguely at the suits. "Our legal team, the best $2,000 an hour minds in the country, have vetted every aspect of this. We are completely secure." It was a lie. A bald-faced, stunningly arrogant lie. I knew our lead counsel, David Chen, wouldn't have approved this. He couldn't have. Not without the final signed transfer agreements, which were still sitting on my desk unsigned. With all due respect, Julian, I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The core pat for the compound itself has not been finalized. The authorship is still. He cut me off, his voice losing its velvet glove to reveal the iron fist beneath. The authorship is Elysian Foods. Everything created within these walls belongs to Elysian Foods. You know this. He turned his gaze to the suits, making me the subject of his next lesson. You see, gentlemen, this is the challenge we face. Innovation cannot be held hostage by what I call artistic temperament, a fear of letting one's creation go out into the world. It's a bottleneck. Nora's caution, while well-intentioned, is becoming a bottleneck. The humiliation was a physical force, a hot wave that washed over my face. He was painting me as a sentimental artist, a hysterical creative, in a room that only respected killers. 10 years of my life, my loyalty, my genius, reduced to a bottleneck. The silence that followed was suffocating. The suits stared at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. I was the obstacle. I was the problem. Julian walked slowly from the head of the table until he was standing just a few feet away from me. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. Nora, he said, his eyes cold and empty, if you feel that your morals are too lofty for the realities of this business, then perhaps this isn't the place for you anymore. He straightened up, his public voice returning. He addressed the whole room again, but his words were daggers aimed only at me. I'll make it a clear choice. If you think you're so indispensable, so brilliant that you can't trust the direction of this company, then by all means, leave. Walk out that door and see what you can do on your own. It was a dare, a public execution. He was making an example of me. Break in line and you will be broken. I felt my world tilting, the floor dropping out from under me. All those years, the late nights in the lab, the missed holidays, the personal sacrifices for this, to be discarded in front of an audience. My eyes flickered back to the screen, desperate for something solid to hold on to, and that's when I saw it. He had moved to the next slide. The title read, Aura Edibles Intellectual Property Roadmap. There was a list of patent application numbers, and below that a line of text. Patent filed under Elysian Foods R&D Division. And then, underneath it, almost too small to read, like a footnote or an afterthought, was another line, with technical contributions by Eleonora Vance. Technical contributions. 6 years of my life. My soul, my intellect, my relentless pursuit of a dream, the sleepless nights scribbling equations on napkins, the eureka moment when I finally stabilized the algae culture. The quiet joy of creating something the world had never seen before, all of it reduced to a technical contribution. They hadn't just stolen my work, they were erasing me from my own story. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The hot, messy wave of humiliation receded. It was replaced by something else. Something cold and sharp and perfectly, terrifyingly clear. It was the clarity that comes after a devastating storm, when the air is still and you can see for miles. Julian Croft, in his infinite arrogance, had just made the single greatest mistake of his career. He thought he was cornering me. He thought he was breaking me. But what he had actually done was hand me a weapon. He had given me the one thing I didn't have before, permission to leave, and with it permission to fight. I moved with a slowness that felt deliberate, powerful. I didn't snatch my things, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I carefully, methodically closed my tablet. The soft click echoed in the silent room. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping against the polished concrete floor. I stood up. 14 pairs of eyes watched my every move. I looked past the suits. I looked past the view of the bay. I looked directly at Julian Croft. His face wore a smug, triumphant smirk. He thought he had won. I accept your offer, Julian, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. I picked up my tablet. I'm leaving, I continued, but I'll be taking what's mine. I turned my back on him. I turned my back on all of them. I walked toward the glass door, each step even and controlled. I did not run. I did not look back. As my hand touched the cool metal of the door handle, I heard it. The sound I knew would follow. The sound that would fuel me for everything that was to come. Julian Croft's mocking, dismissive laughter echoing down the hall behind me. The elevator ride down from the 50th floor was the longest journey of my life. The mocking sound of Julian's laughter didn't follow me, but I could still feel its vibration in my bones. 40 floors, 30, 20. With each descending level, the hot shame of my public execution began to cool, solidifying into something hard and heavy in my gut. It was rage, pure and uncut. But it was a quiet rage, a patient rage, a rage that knew how to wait. By the time the doors opened onto the 15th floor, the home of the R&D labs, the transformation was complete. I was no longer Nora the victim. I was Nora the strategist. Julian thought he had fired a stray bullet. He had no idea he had just armed a sniper. I walked through the labs, the familiar sense of distilled citrus, fermenting yeasts, and earthy botanicals wrapping around me like a hug. This was my sanctuary. My team, a brilliant group of young scientists, looked up as I passed, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. I gave them a small, reassuring smile that I did not feel. I couldn't tell them, not yet. They were a part of my plan too, but their role was to remain innocent. I entered my private office, a glass-walled cube filled with books, molecular models, and the controlled chaos of a mind in constant motion. I locked the door. My hands were perfectly steady, my heart beat with a slow, powerful rhythm. Julian had made a classic predator's mistake. He had underestimated his prey, assuming emotion had clouded my intellect. He didn't know that for the past year, my intellect had been running a parallel process, a secret operating system in the back of my mind. I called it the contingency plan. It had started 3 years ago when Belmont Capital bought a majority stake in Elysian Foods. Before them, this company had a soul. Julian, then just a charismatic COO, had recruited me from a university research fellowship. He sold me a vision, not a job. He spoke of a family of innovators, of changing the way the world experienced food. He was magnetic, and for a while, the dream was real. We were pioneers. Project Lumina was born in that era of hope, a passion project that started with me taking unauthorized algae samples from a scuba trip and cultivating them in a spare incubator after hours. Then the money arrived. The family was replaced by a rigid corporate hierarchy. Our collaborative playground became a field of key performance indicators. And Julian, once our visionary leader, became their CEO. He learned a new language, the sterile dialect of shareholder value and quarterly earnings. The artist in him died, and a king took his place. A greedy, paranoid king. The first move against me was subtle. David Chen, our new head of legal, a man with the soul of a spreadsheet, sent me the comprehensive invention agreement. It was a legal bear trap disguised as paperwork. It demanded I transfer all rights to all inventions, past, present, and future, to Elysian Foods LLC. It was a complete violation of my original contract, which guaranteed me named inventor status and a percentage of any patent licensed from my direct work. I told David I'd have my lawyer review it. That was 2 years ago. The unsigned document still sat in my desk drawer. My suspicions grew. Julian started talking about Lumina in board meetings as a company asset, carefully avoiding my name. That's when I began my audit. Late at night, using the high-level administrative access I'd been granted in the family, days, and no one had ever thought to revoke, I started digging through the legal servers. It took me 3 weeks, but I found it. Buried in a mislabeled folder was the proof of their conspiracy. 2 patent draft documents. They were identical in size, with timestamps just 3 minutes apart, created at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. The first one, Lumina Patent Draft EV, PDF, listed the inventor clearly, Ileonora Vance. The second, Lumina Patent Draft Corp., PDF, had that line replaced with Elysian Foods R&D Division. They were preparing a twin filing, one to hold in reserve and one to show the board and investors, effectively writing me out of existence. My blood ran cold. This wasn't business. This was identity theft on a corporate scale. That night, the contingency plan was born. It wasn't about revenge, not then. It was about survival. I knew I couldn't trust their servers, their files, their system. I needed an incorruptible witness. I turned to the blockchain. I took the original PDF, the one with my name on it, and created a cryptographic hash, a unique digital fingerprint. I then embedded that hash into a public blockchain transaction. It was the digital equivalent of carving my name into a stone tablet and burying it in the foundations of time. It created an unchangeable, publicly verifiable, timestamp proof that my document, with my name on it, existed at that specific moment, long before their fraudulent version. It was my digital birth certificate for Project Lumina. I copied that original file, along with its blockchain verification key, onto a tiny, encrypted solid-state drive. The drive was housed inside a custom-made silver brooch, a simple, elegant piece shaped like an algae form that I wore on my lapel nearly every day. My insurance policy, hidden in plain sight. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place last year. David Chen, in a fit of corporate tidiness, had ordered me to purge and consolidate all R&D draft files older than 2 years. He stood over my shoulder as I ran the deletion protocols. It was a test. They wanted to see if I would erase the old Lumina files, the ones that proved its origin with me. I performed the deletion flawlessly. What he didn't know was that I was running the process in a virtual sandbox. To him, the files were gone. In reality, I had simply moved the entire original directory, with all its metadata and original creation dates intact, into a hidden, triple-encrypted partition on my local terminal. The ghost in their machine. My ghost. Now, sitting in my office, the plan shifted from defense to offense. I spent the next 4 days playing the part of the humiliated, defeated employee. I was quiet in meetings. I avoided eye contact with Julian. I let the rumors fly. The suits watched me with a smug pity. They thought I was broken. They had no idea I was building a siege engine. On Friday morning, I printed my resignation letter. Simple, direct, effective immediately. Tucked into the envelope with it was a simple, elegant USB drive, a gift for them to remember me by. It contained a single, password-protected file, a copy of the original patent application, the one with my name on it, along with a link and instructions on how to verify its creation date on the public blockchain. My exit interview was with Karen from Human Resources. She was a kind woman, trapped in a job that often required her to be unkind. She pleaded with me to reconsider. She hinted at a massive severance package, a golden handshake to ensure my silence. "It's not about the money, Karen," I said, my voice full of a sadness I genuinely felt for her, for the good people who would be caught in the crossfire. "I just can't work here anymore." I pushed a single piece of paper across the desk. It was a standard asset handover form, listing my company laptop, my keycard, my phone. I had already signed it. "I just need your signature here, acknowledging the return of company property." She scanned it quickly. Her eyes, clouded with procedural boredom, slid right over the line I had added at the bottom in standard legal font. A single, devastating sentence. "Employee confirms the handover of all personal and company assets, including the attached full and original invention documentation for Project Lumina as per the IP Act." Attached, of course, was the USB drive. "Just a formality," I said quietly. She nodded, picked up her pen, and signed her name. The click of the pen on the paper was the sound of a starting gun. She had just become Elysian Foods' official witness. She had just signed a corporate confession, acknowledging receipt of the very evidence that would destroy them. I left the building, my personal effects in a small box. I didn't look up at the towering monument to Julian Croft's ego. I got into my car in the parking garage and sat for a moment in the quiet dark. The first phase was complete. Now, it was time for the second. I took out my personal laptop. I connected it to a secure, untraceable mobile hotspot. I typed in a long, complex web address, a backdoor into Elysian's R&D server network that I had built myself years ago for remote emergencies. My original, never-revoked, root administrator credentials still worked. I navigated to the directory where all the research, data, and development files for Project Lumina were stored. All 6 years of it, including their fraudulent, ready-to-be-filed patent application. I took a deep breath. I highlighted everything. And I initiated a secure, multi-pass data wipe. Not a simple deletion. A digital shredder that overwrites every bit of data with random characters, over and over, until it is nothing but meaningless noise, completely and irrevocably gone. It took less than 30 seconds. An entire corporate strategy, a billion-dollar product launch, vanished into the ether. The one thing I didn't touch was the server's access logs. They would remain perfectly intact. They would show Julian Croft's and David Chen's user IDs accessing and altering the original files over the past few months. And then they would show that all of that data, their entire crown jewel, had simply ceased to exist at 11:37 a.m. on a Friday morning. I closed the laptop. I started the car. The past was a cloud of digital dust behind me. The ghost was gone, and I was driving toward the war. I didn't drive home. Home was a place of comfort, of softness. This moment required something hard, anonymous, and functional. I drove 2 levels down in the public parking garage, found a spot in a dimly lit corner far from the elevators, and killed the engine. The concrete walls seemed to absorb all sound, creating a pocket of profound silence. This was my new office, my war room. Phase 2 of the plan was the most critical. Wiping their servers was a defensive act, a scorched earth policy to prevent them from using my work. Now I had to build my fortress. I had to plant my flag so deeply and so legally that no army of $2,000 an hour lawyers could ever remove it. I opened my laptop again, the glow of the screen pushing back the gloom. I didn't navigate to a hidden back door this time. I went to a public one. The website for the United States Patent and Trademark Office. It was a clunky, government issue portal, but to me, it was the gates to the kingdom. I logged in, not as a corporate representative, but under my personal account as an individual inventor. I had created it years ago, but never used it. In my dashboard, I could see the preliminary, placeholder application for patent 9,557,224B, also known as the Lumina compound. The assignee of record was listed as Elysian Foods LLC. My name was listed only as a contributor. It was their fraudulent filing, waiting for final submission. My mouse hovered over a link that read, Initiate Challenge and Reassignment of Inventorship. I clicked it. A series of digital forms appeared, asking for justification, for evidence. This was the moment everything hinged upon. I began to upload my arsenal. First, the original signed employment contract from 12 years ago. I highlighted the key clause, Section 8.3. Intellectual property developed by the employee shall remain the property of the employee until such a time as a specific, mutually executed invention assignment agreement for said property is completed and signed post-filing. It was their own legal language, drafted long before Julian's reign, from a time when the company actually respected its innovators. Next, I uploaded the unsigned, comprehensive invention agreement that David Chen had sent me 2 years ago. I included a sworn affidavit stating I had refused to sign it as it violated the terms of my original contract. Then came the crown jewel. I uploaded the original patent draft PDF, the one that clearly named me, Eliora Vance, as the sole inventor. And with it, I uploaded the blockchain verification key. I wrote a simple, clear explanation. The attached cryptographic hash, verifiable on the public Ethereum blockchain, provides immutable, time-stamped proof that this document, naming myself as inventor, was created on March 14th, 2 years prior, predating any version listing Elysian Foods as the primary assignee. I was using 21st century technology to enforce a timeless principle. You cannot steal a person's name. Finally, I cited Article 4.1 of the American Inventors Protection Act, a clause that allows an inventor to reclaim temporary sole ownership if they can provide prima facie evidence that the assigned party has acted in bad faith or is attempting to commit fraud. I wrote, Elysian Foods has acted in bad faith by creating a fraudulent parallel patent application with the intent to erase my name and deny my legal rights as the inventor. I am hereby reclaiming my rights. I read it all over one last time. My hands were steady. My mind was a steel trap. I clicked Submit. The screen refreshed. A small green box appeared. Your submission has been received. You will be notified of any status change. Case ID 77B901. It was done. I had fired the first shot in the legal war. I closed the laptop. The silence of the parking garage returned. The entire process had taken 14 minutes. At 11:51 a.m., Project Lumina, my Lumina, was now officially in dispute, and legally, temporarily, it was mine again. The first week was a study in silence. A deep, deafening silence from Elysian Foods. I knew what this silence meant. It was the sound of panic. It was the sound of a CEO screaming at his legal team. It was the sound of frantic IT technicians staring at empty server directories, unable to explain where $1 billion project had simply vanished. It was the horrifying, dawning realization that the meek little scientist they had publicly humiliated had not just left the building, she had taken the foundation with her. I spent that week preparing. I consolidated my finances. I contacted a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but the best. Julian Croft had his $2,000 an hour men. I needed a legend. I sent one email with the entire package of evidence to a man named Marcus Thorne, a legal pit bull famous for taking on corporate giants and winning. His reply came 2 hours later. I'll do it, pro bono for now, this is going to be fun. 10 days after I walked out, the first official response from Elysian arrived. It wasn't a phone call. It was a letter, delivered by courier, thick with self-importance. It was a cease and desist order. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It accused me of tortious interference, misappropriation of trade secrets, and breach of fiduciary duty. It threatened to sue me into oblivion for stealing proprietary company technology. I read it twice, a small smile playing on my lips. They had made their second critical error. They were aggressive, threatening, arrogant, but I saw the fear hiding behind the jargon. They never once mentioned the patent. They never once mentioned the word inventorship. They were screaming about the technology, but they were deathly silent about who actually owned it. They knew they were on shaky ground, and they were trying to bully me into submission before we ever got to that core argument. Julian's fingerprints were all over it. This wasn't just a legal document, it was an extension of his ego. He thought he could scare me. He still didn't understand who I was. I began documenting everything. I bought a legal app for my phone that announced every call was being recorded. I saved the threatening letter. I was building a second arsenal, an arsenal of their own aggression. When the legal threats didn't produce an immediate, terrified response, Julian escalated. The tactics became personal. A gray sedan started parking across the street from my apartment. It was always there, nondescript, with one person in the driver's seat, just sitting. When I went to my local coffee shop, a man I'd never seen before would sit in a corner, not drinking, just watching. They weren't trying to be subtle. They wanted me to see them. They wanted me to feel hunted. They wanted me to feel small and alone, to remember that they were a giant corporation and I was just one woman. It culminated one evening as I was driving home from my lawyer's office. The gray sedan pulled out behind me. It followed me for miles, staying 2 car lengths back, its headlights a constant, menacing presence in my rearview mirror. It followed me off the highway onto the quieter residential streets. My heart was pounding, a cold knot of fear tightening in my stomach. This was the primal physical threat I had worried about, but fear, like rage, can be a fuel. I thought about what they wanted. They wanted me to panic, to drive erratically, to go home and lock my doors and hide. I did the opposite. I made a sharp, unsignaled right turn, then a left. I was heading downtown. The gray sedan stayed right with me. I drove calmly, obeying every traffic law. I was not the one who was going to make a mistake. Finally, I saw the sign I was looking for. I slowed down, flipped my turn signal on, and pulled smoothly into the brightly lit visitor parking lot of the Chicago Police Department's 18th District headquarters. I put my car in park directly in front of the main entrance, under the watchful eye of a security camera. In my rearview mirror, I saw the gray sedan hesitate at the entrance to the lot. The driver was a silhouette, but I could feel the confusion, the panic. This was not in their playbook. After a moment of indecision, the car accelerated abruptly, screeching past the entrance and disappearing into the night. I sat there for a long time, my breathing slowly returning to normal. I had called their bluff. They were willing to be predators, but only in the shadows. I had dragged them into the light. The next morning, the war changed. The silence was broken. An email appeared in my inbox. It wasn't from Julian. It was from David Chen. The subject line was a single word: discussion. The message was brief, the arrogant legal threats replaced with a strained, almost pleading tone. Nora, I think there has been a significant misunderstanding. We believe it's in everyone's best interest to find an amicable path forward. Please let us know when you might be available to talk. I let the email sit in my inbox for 4 hours. I let them wonder. I let them sweat. Then I wrote my reply. It was even briefer than his. David, I am willing to negotiate, but not at a table with Mr. Croft. That is non-negotiable. I hit send. I had survived their legal threats. I had survived their physical intimidation. Now they knew they were not in control. I was, and we would play by my rules. My response to David Chen was a declaration of war on my own terms. By refusing to meet with Julian, I wasn't just setting a condition, I was attacking the very core of his power. Julian Croft's entire world was built on his ability to control the room, to dominate any negotiation with his charisma and thinly veiled threats. By removing him from the equation, I was telling Elysian Foods that their king had no power here. I was negotiating with the kingdom, not the man who happened to wear the crown. For 2 days, there was another silence, but this one felt different. It was the silence of a frantic, checkmated board of directors trying to figure out a new strategy. Julian, I imagined, was a caged animal, roaring at his lawyers, unable to comprehend a battle he wasn't allowed to personally fight. While they scrambled, I moved. My goal was never to simply get my job back or get a payout from Elysian. That would be like winning a battle but losing the war. My creation, Project Lumina, was meant to change the world, not to be held hostage in a legal dispute until it became irrelevant. I needed more than just legal ownership. I needed a partner. I needed a champion. I shifted my research from legal statutes to market analysis. Who was Elysian's biggest competitor? Not just in sales, but in philosophy. The answer was clear: Verdant Organics. They were everything Elysian wasn't. While Elysian marketed a glossy, lab-created version of wellness, Verdant built its brand on authentic, earth-to-table principles. They were the respected elder statesmen to Elysian's flashy new money. And most importantly, their growth had been steady but slow. They were powerful, but they lacked a truly disruptive innovation. They lacked a secret weapon. They lacked Lumina. I spent an entire day researching their executive team. I didn't want a lawyer or a CEO. I wanted a strategist, a visionary. I found her in their chief strategy officer, a woman named Marin Dorsey. Her profile was formidable: a PhD in biochemistry, an MBA from Stanford, and a track record of identifying game-changing trends years before anyone else. Her interviews spoke of ethical innovation and sustainable futures. She spoke my language. I bypassed all official channels. I found her direct email address through a university alumni network. My email to her was concise and audacious. Subject: an independent asset seeking a strategic home. Dear Ms. Dorsey, my name is Dr. Eleonora Vance. For the past 6 years, I was the head of innovation at Elysian Foods and the sole inventor of a proprietary, self-regenerating flavor and nutrient compound you may soon know as Aura Edibles. Due to circumstances of professional ethics, I am no longer with the company. The full, unencumbered intellectual property rights to this compound are now legally and exclusively mine. I believe my technology aligns perfectly with Verdant Organics' strategic goals and could redefine the future of your product line. I am available to meet at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Dr. Eleonora Vance. It was a bold move, a high-stakes gamble. I was a recently departed employee from their biggest rival, offering their holy grail. She could have deleted the email, or worse, forwarded it straight to Julian Croft as a power play. Her response came in under an hour. Subject: Ray, an independent asset seeking a strategic home. Dr. Vance. Fascinating. How does tomorrow afternoon sound? My office. 4 p.m. Marin Dorsey. The next day, I walked into the Verdant Organics headquarters. The building itself was a statement. While Elysian Tower was a monument of cold steel and glass, the Verdant building was a living structure of reclaimed wood, rooftop gardens, and walls covered in green, oxygen-producing moss. It smelled of earth and clean air. It felt like coming home. Marin Dorsey's office was on the 42nd floor. It was spacious, filled with light and plants, with a panoramic view of the city. In the distance, I could see the Elysian Tower. From here, it looked small, insignificant. Marin was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of calm authority. There were no lawyers present, just her, just me. She didn't waste time with small talk. Dr. Vance, she said, gesturing to a chair, you made some extraordinary claims in your email. Show me. For the next 20 minutes, I didn't talk about Julian or Elysian. I didn't talk about lawsuits or theft. I talked about the science. I talked about the magic. On her office's smart wall, I brought up the 3D molecular models of Lumina. I explained how it was a thermoelectric biosensor, capable of drawing energy from ambient temperature differentials as low as 2 degrees, allowing it to perpetually regenerate its flavor-enhancing enzymes. It's a sensor that powers itself indefinitely, I explained, my voice filled with the passion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks. Imagine a yogurt that tastes more like fresh fruit the longer it's on the shelf. A sports drink that replenishes electrolytes using the drinker's own body heat. It's not an additive, it's an active, living ingredient. Marin watched, her face unreadable, as I walked her through the data, the successful trials, the potential applications. When I was finished, she was silent for a long moment. The science is breathtaking, she said finally, but you mentioned the intellectual property was unencumbered. Your former employer is launching a massive campaign around something called Aura Edibles. I assume they believe they own this breathtaking science. Why are they wrong? This was the second part of the presentation. This was the checkmate. They are wrong, I said, my tone shifting from scientist to strategist, because they chose fraud over integrity. I displayed the official USPTO filing timestamp on the screen. Then, I displayed the immutable hash from the blockchain. I showed her how it created an unbreakable chain of custody, proving my sole inventorship 2 years before Elysian ever created their fraudulent documents. Then, I showed her the proof of their fraud. I pulled up the 2 PDF files, side by side. One with my name, one with Elysian R&D, timestamped 3 minutes apart. And finally, I said, delivering the killing blow, according to my original employment contract, any patent assignment required a mutually signed agreement after the initial filing. I have a sworn affidavit that I refused to sign their agreement. They have no such document. They have no legal claim. What they have is a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign for a product they have no legal right to produce. Marin leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was the first time I had seen her smile. It was genuine, it was predatory. So any lawsuit from them is not a risk to a potential partner, I concluded. It's my leverage. The moment they sue me, all of this becomes public record and discovery. The blockchain proof, the twin filings, the lack of a signed agreement, it would trigger shareholder lawsuits and likely a federal investigation into their fraudulent patent filing. They know that, which is why they haven't sued me yet. They are trapped. Marin stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city at the distant, tiny Elysian tower. They won't buy you out, she mused, thinking aloud. Croft's ego is too big. He'll try to crush you. They'll file for an injunction, try to bury you in legal fees. I have Marcus Thorne representing me, I said quietly. Marin's head snapped back around, her eyebrows raised. The Marcus Thorne, the one who took on Omnicorp. She let out a low whistle. My God, you really did come prepared. She was silent for another minute. I could practically see the strategic calculations running behind her eyes. Then she turned back to me, her expression decisive. We're not going to buy the patent from you, Dr. Vance, she said. My heart sank for a second. We're going to do something better, she continued. I want Verdant Organics to acquire the permanent, exclusive, worldwide license to commercialize the Lumina compound. You retain full ownership of the patent. You are the inventor. You are the owner. We are simply your champions in the marketplace. It was more than I could have hoped for. I would not just be a seller, I would be a partner. I would retain control of my life's work. I have one condition, I said, pressing my final advantage. I outlined the royalty reversal clause I had conceived. If Argonne was forced to license the technology from Everline, 30% of their fees would go directly to me. Marin's smile returned, wider this time. A poison pill, she said with clear admiration. You not only want to win, you want to make sure every dollar he earns from your genius tastes like ash in his mouth. I like it. You have a deal, Dr. Vance. We shook on it. Her legal team drafted the agreement in 2 hours. It included an 8-figure signing bonus that was wired to my account before the ink on the contract was dry. At 4:45 p.m. that afternoon, as I was leaving the Verdant building, Marin made a call. Update the public USPTO portal, she said. Now. I checked on my phone as I waited for the elevator. The status for patent 9,557,224B had been updated. It now read, exclusive licensing rights assigned to Verdant Organics in perpetuity by inventor Dr. Eleonora Vance. The war was about to become very, very public, and I had just brought in the cavalry. The news broke not like a ripple, but like a digital shockwave. It didn't appear in a trade publication or an industry blog. Marin Dorsey, a master of strategic communication, had given the exclusive to the Wall Street Journal. The story ran on the front page of their business section the next morning. The headline was a dagger. Verdant Organics announces revolutionary Lumina tech, securing exclusive license from inventor Dr. Eleonora Vance, formerly of rival Elysian Foods. The article was a meticulously crafted narrative. It painted me not as a disgruntled ex-employee, but as a principled inventor. It positioned Verdant not as an opportunist, but as a champion of ethical innovation. And it framed Elysian Foods as the clumsy giant that had let the future slip through its fingers. I didn't have to be in Elysian Tower to know what was happening. I could imagine it perfectly. The panicked calls from board members. The frantic queries from investors. And from the 50th floor, from Julian Croft's corner office, I could almost hear the sound described to me later by a friend in accounting, a primal roar of pure fury, followed by the distinct, satisfying shatter of expensive porcelain against a wall. Julian's response was exactly what Marin and I had predicted, rash, emotional, and driven by a bruised ego. He didn't try to negotiate. He didn't try to strategize. He declared all-out war. He commanded David Chen to fix this now. Fixing it, in their minds, meant filing an emergency petition with the USPTO. They sought an immediate injunction to freeze the licensing agreement and accused me of the illegal transfer of an asset that rightfully belonged to Elysian Foods. They painted a picture of a rogue scientist who had stolen years of company-funded research and sold it to the highest bidder. It was their third and most fatal mistake. By filing the petition, they were dragging the dispute out of the shadows of threatening letters and into a formal, public, and legally binding arena. They had just voluntarily stepped into the very trap I had set for them. The preliminary hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later in Alexandria, Virginia, at the headquarters of the USP. The hearing room was an imposing space, all dark wood and serious portraits of past directors, designed to make you feel small. Julian Croft sat at the opposing table, flanked by David Chen and 2 expensive lawyers from a top DC firm. He looked supremely confident, even smug. He was back in his element, a room full of power and money. He caught my eye and gave me a small, dismissive sneer. He still thought this was his world, his game. I sat at my table, and next to me sat Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a legend in intellectual property law for a reason. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and a deceptively gentle demeanor. He didn't look like a pit bull, he looked like a history professor. But when Elysian's lead lawyer, a man named Garrett, saw who was sitting next to me, I saw a flicker of pure, undiluted panic in his eyes. He visibly paled. He leaned over and whispered frantically to David Chen. Julian's smug expression didn't change. He had never faced a real predator before. He had no idea what was coming. Garrett, for Elysian, went first. He was a good performer. He painted a compelling picture of corporate betrayal. He spoke of the millions of dollars Elysian had invested, the state-of-the-art labs they had provided, the trust they had placed in me. He portrayed me as a thief in a lab coat. Then, it was our turn. Marcus Thorne didn't give a grand speech. He simply said, "The petitioner's entire case is built on a foundation of ownership they cannot prove. We would like to call Dr. Eleonora Vance to the stand to clarify the facts." I walked to the podium. My voice was calm and steady. I wasn't the emotional artist Julian had painted me as. I was a scientist, and I was here to present the data. Under Thorne's gentle questioning, I laid out the timeline of Lumina's creation, starting from the early days, long before Belmont Capital's investment. Then Thorne said, "Dr. Vance, could you please direct the board's attention to Section 8.3 of your original signed employment contract, which we have submitted as Exhibit A?" I read the clause aloud, the one requiring a separate, signed transfer agreement for any invention. The room was silent. "Mr. Chen," Thorne said, his voice still mild, addressing Elysian's legal chief. "Could you please provide the board with the mutually executed and signed invention assignment agreement for the Lumina compound, as required by the contract your own company drafted?" David Chen stood up. He looked at his papers. He looked at Garrett. He looked at Julian. He couldn't meet Thorne's gaze. We do not have that specific document at this time," he stammered. A murmur went through the room. The 3 board members on the review panel exchanged glances. "You don't have it now." "Or you don't have it at all, Mr. Chen," Thorne pressed gently. "We do not have it," Chen admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Julian's face had gone rigid, the smugness replaced by a tight, angry line. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. No further questions on that point," Thorne said. He turned back to me. "Dr. Vance, you resigned from Elysian Foods on Friday, October 16th. Could you please describe what you gave to the Human Resources Department upon your departure?" "I gave them my resignation letter," I said, "and a small USB drive." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out an identical USB drive. I placed it on the podium. "This is a copy of what was on that drive." Thorne addressed the board. "Members of the panel, we are now presenting Exhibit B, a complete, unedited, cryptographically verifiable copy of Elysian Foods' own internal server access logs for the R&D directory containing the Lumina project files." I could see David Chen and Garrett begin to sweat. This was not in their playbook. "The logs are quite illuminating," Thorne continued, his voice hardening for the first time. "They show the creation of a fraudulent, duplicate patent application at 2:17 a.m. on March 12th of last year, an application that illegally removed Dr. Vance's name as inventor and replaced it with the corporate entity." The room was utterly still. "But most interestingly," Thorne said, letting the words hang in the air, "the logs show the user ID that created and saved that fraudulent document." He looked down at his notes. "The user ID is J. Croft." A collective gasp went through the room. All eyes snapped to Julian. "Fabricated!" Julian shouted, leaping to his feet. That's a lie, she fabricated those logs. Mr. Croft, sit down, the lead panel member commanded, his voice like a gavel. Julian stood there, frozen, his face a mask of rage and disbelief, his carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. He had exposed himself. Marcus Thorne walked to the center of the room. "Members of the panel," he said, his voice now resonating with cold, legal authority. "The facts are simple. The inventor's rights are inalienable without her signed consent, which they admit they do not have. Furthermore, they have presented no evidence to refute our blockchain verification of authorship. What they have done, and what their own server logs prove, is engage in a deliberate conspiracy to commit fraud against my client and against the integrity of this very office. The law is clear on the severe consequences of knowingly filing fraudulent documents with a federal agency." He walked back to our table and sat down. He had taken less than 15 minutes. The panel deliberated for less than 10. The lead member cleared his throat. He looked directly at Julian Croft. "After reviewing the evidence presented, the board's decision is unanimous. The petition for an injunction by Elysian Foods is denied. The legal, binding, and sole inventorship for patent 9,557,224 B belongs to Dr. Eleonora Vance." The words hit Julian like a physical blow. He didn't roar this time. He just collapsed into his chair. All the color drained from his face, leaving behind a gray, waxy pallor. His mouth hung open slightly in stunned, abject defeat. The king had been dethroned, not in a boardroom, but in a public forum, brought down by his own hubris and a ghost in his machine. The aftermath of the USPTO ruling was not a slow decline, it was a corporate freefall. The market, which operates on confidence and abhors uncertainty, reacted swiftly and brutally. The moment the news hit the wires, Elysian Foods stock ticker, ELYS, turned into a waterfall of red. By the time the market closed the next day, it had plummeted 15%. By the end of the week, it was down 18%, erasing nearly $1 billion of shareholder value. Julian's carefully constructed empire of smoke and mirrors was dissolving in the harsh light of public failure. His reaction was predictably irrational. His first command, according to my sources, was to have HR completely erase me from their systems. He wanted every record, every email, every mention of my name expunged, as if I had never existed. It was a petty, futile gesture, but it backfired spectacularly. The system I had helped design 6 years earlier for legal compliance was a Rightwants server for employee records. It meant data could be added but never truly deleted, only archived. The attempt to erase me didn't remove the data. It simply created a new, time-stamped log of the attempt itself, fresh evidence of a deliberate effort to destroy evidence, which Marcus Thorne gleefully added to our growing file. While Julian was busy trying to rewrite the past, Verdant Organics was aggressively shaping the future. Marin Dorsey dispatched a volley of cease and desist letters to Elysian's manufacturing partners. The letters were masterpieces of legal precision, detailing every single component of Elysian's planned Aura Edibles product line that was built on the principles of the Lumina patent. The message was unequivocal. Every assembly line you have running in Ohio and Texas is producing stolen goods. The letters included a copy of our exclusive licensing agreement. Production ground to a halt. The revolution Julian had promised was dead on arrival. It was a week later on a quiet Tuesday evening that my phone rang. The number was blocked. I answered, activating the recording app as I always did. "Nora," the voice was strained, hoarse. It took me a second to place it. It was Julian. All the polished, performative charisma was gone. What was left was a dry, brittle husk. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice neutral. "We need to talk," he said, the words clumsy, desperate. "Off the record. Just you and me. We can work something out, a private settlement. I can make you very wealthy." It was the classic move of a cornered bully. When threats fail, try bribery. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about money. "There is no us anymore, Julian," I said, my voice cold and clear. "There is no private settlement. You had your chance to do the right thing when you could have been an honest man. You chose a different path." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear his ragged breathing. "Just tell me what you want," he pleaded. "Give me a number. Give the patent back to us. We'll pay, whatever you want." I leaned back in my chair, looking out my window at the city lights. I remembered his mocking laughter echoing down the hall. I remembered his condescending smile as he tried to break me in front of his board. "You know, it's funny, Julian," I said softly. You once told me that if I thought I was so brilliant, I should leave and do it on my own. I let the words hang in the air, a perfect echo of his own challenge. So I did. Please, Nora, he whispered. The word was alien in his mouth. Just name your price. I didn't have to think about it. I already had the number. I had seen it in the internal financial projections he had prepared for his board, the ones I had copied from the server before I wiped it clean. The valuation he himself had placed on my work. $450 million, I said. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. He knew the number. He knew exactly where it came from. He stammered. The company doesn't have that kind of liquid capital. That's an extinction-level event for us. I know, I said. I felt no triumph, no joy, just the quiet, cold satisfaction of a perfectly executed equation. I know it's impossible. That's the point. The market values my work at $450 million, Julian. And just this afternoon, I added, delivering the final, crushing blow, I signed the official licensing agreement for that exact technology. I signed it with your biggest competitor. I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call. The final collapse was swift. The news of the halted production lines leaked. Major clients, seeing the instability and the legal quagmire, began pulling their contracts. A German auto consortium that wanted to use Lumina in their battery cooling systems, a major defense contractor, a consumer electronics giant. 2 days later, Verdant Organics issued a press release officially announcing the value of their licensing deal, cementing the $450 million valuation of the Lumina technology in the public record. It was a masterstroke by Marin, a final twist of the knife that made Elysian's loss quantifiable and undeniable. That afternoon, the board of Elysian Foods convened an emergency meeting. Julian Croft was forced to resign as CEO, effective immediately. He was also removed from his seat on the board. The Wall Street Journal ran the follow-up story the next day. The headline was simple and devastating. How one inventor cost Elysian Dynamics its future. My war was over. I had won. I had taken back my name, secured my invention, and dismantled the empire of the man who tried to erase me. I should have felt ecstatic, but as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I mostly just felt still. The rage that had fueled me for so long had burned itself out, leaving behind a vast, quiet emptiness. The fight was over. Now I had to figure out what came next. In the quiet days that followed Julian's ousting, a strange sense of anticlimax settled over me. The war was won, the enemy vanquished, but the silence in my apartment felt less like peace and more like an echo. My life had been defined for so long by a singular, burning purpose. First, the passion of creation, and then the cold fury of reclamation. With both fires now banked, I was left in the unfamiliar quiet of the aftermath, tasked with answering a question I hadn't let myself consider. What now? One evening, a cryptic text message appeared on my phone from an unknown number. It contained just 3 words. Are you proud? I knew instinctively who it was from. Julian. It was the last desperate barb from a defeated man, an attempt to poison my victory by framing it as a hollow, prideful conquest. I thought about it for a long moment. Was I proud? Pride felt too simple, too close to the arrogance that had been his downfall. It wasn't the right word for the complex cocktail of relief, exhaustion, and profound clarity I was feeling. I typed back my reply, just 4 words. No, I am free. I hit send and then blocked the number. It was my final communication with the world I had left behind. Freedom, that was the right word. Freedom from him, freedom from the fight, and most importantly, freedom to become something new. 2 months later, I was sitting in the front row of a beautifully restored Art Deco auditorium in downtown San Francisco. The air was electric with anticipation. This was the official Verdant Organics product launch event. Marin Dorsey stood on stage, a beacon of calm confidence, as she unveiled their new flagship line of wellness products. The branding was elegant, the packaging was sustainable, and the slogan, displayed on a massive screen behind her, was simple and powerful, powered by Lumina. I was an honored guest, not a participant. My role in the story was complete. Marin had offered me a senior position at Verdant, a lab of my own, anything I wanted. I had politely declined. I needed to build something for myself on my own terms. We remained allies, partners in the pact, but my future lay outside the walls of any corporation. As Marin spoke, I noticed a flicker of movement at a side entrance near the back of the auditorium. A man slipped in, trying to be invisible. He was hunched, his suit rumpled. His face was pale and gaunt, a shadow of the swaggering corporate titan he had once been. It was Julian. He found an empty seat in the last row, a ghost at the feast of his own demise. He didn't come here to heckle or protest. He came here, I realized, because he couldn't stay away. He was a moth drawn to the flame that had consumed him. On stage, Marin was reaching the crescendo of her presentation. "The technology behind Lumina is revolutionary," she said, her voice resonating through the hall. But technology is only as good as the vision that inspires it. And this vision did not come from a focus group or a marketing department. It came from the passion and brilliance of one individual. The massive screen behind her changed. The product logos faded, replaced by 3 simple words in clean, white font. "A vision by Dr. Eliora Vance." The auditorium erupted. Hundreds of people, journalists, investors, industry leaders, rose to their feet in a wave of thunderous applause. It washed over me, a sound of validation so profound it almost brought me to my knees. It wasn't for a product. It wasn't for a stock price. It was for me, for my name. My eyes found Julian in the back row. He was frozen, a statue of pure despair. The applause, the public recognition of my name, was a torment far greater than any financial loss. It was the final, undeniable proof that he had not only lost, but that I had been the one who truly mattered all along. It was a footnote in my story. An event host appeared at my side. "Dr. Vance, Marin would be honored if you would join her on stage." I walked up the steps, into the blinding white lights, the applause growing louder. Marin greeted me with a warm, genuine smile and a handshake. She led me to the center of the stage. The host, a man with a dazzling smile, turned to me. "Dr. Vance, that was an incredible ovation," he said. "After such an amazing journey, is there anything you'd like to share with us?" He was expecting a few words of thanks, a gracious platitude. I looked out over the sea of faces, the flashing cameras, and then I looked past them to the lonely, broken figure in the very last row. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice was clear, steady, and carried to every corner of the room. "Just one thing," I said. My gaze was locked on Julian. "Never dare someone to leave when you don't know what they're taking with them." The finality of the statement hung in the air for a beat, and then the auditorium exploded in another wave of applause and a flurry of camera flashes. I gave the microphone back to Marin, gave her a small nod of thanks, and then, instead of returning to my seat, I turned and walked off the stage, toward the same side exit Julian had used. I didn't look back. The door closed behind me, muffling the sound of the event to a dull roar. I was in a quiet, empty hallway. Through a large pane of glass, I could see the San Francisco skyline. The verdant building stood proud, but further in the distance, almost lost in the afternoon haze, was the familiar silhouette of the Elysian Tower. For the first time, it didn't look like a monument to my pain. It didn't look like a rival's fortress. It looked like a tombstone, a marker for a life I had left behind, for a battle that was finally, truly over. I took a deep breath of the cool, clean air. A genuine smile, my own smile, spread across my face. I had walked into that boardroom a scientist. I had walked out a warrior. And now I was walking away as something else entirely. Myself, completely and absolutely free.